And not everybody's comfortable in social settings. God knows I'm awkward. Having this camera in my hand gave me an excuse to talk to people. Sure, you can say, oh, we're using the camera as a shield, possibly, but you're also using that to talk to people. It's like you're using the camera to tell that person's story and getting them to talk about themselves.
Hello and welcome to Coffee Connections podcast. Today our special guest is Walter Tychnowicz of Wiresharp Photography.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, see you later. Kidding. Yeah.
So Walter, tell me what type of things that you photograph.
I started off just in photography, not even, well, what happened was my father had passed away in '82. And he was a photographer. He had like Minolta cameras and things, right? So what had happened was when he passed away, my mother saw his cameras and she thought, well, what am I going to do with these? My brother didn't want them because, you know, he was a rebellious 15-year-old. And
how old were you?
I was 11 at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my mother tells me, she says, well, I'm just going to give these away unless you want them. And it was like old Minolta SRT 101 cameras. Like they weren't anything as elaborate of what I have today. So I says, okay, I took it. Because my father never let me try the cameras because obviously as a child you think, oh, he's going to break it, right? Technically true, but we'll gloss over that part. So what happened was I had the camera, started taking pictures, and I liked doing that. And so what had happened was, as I was going on with my photography, I upgraded to Minolta cameras. And Minolta had an autofocus system, so I was like, that was neat. Yeah. So I had that. And then when I started trying to work for the newspapers back when I was 16, the photographers had suggested, you know, you should dump the Minolta gear and go to something more like Nikon or Canon. Right. And there was that pivotal choice back in '88. Do I go Nikon or do I go Canon? So I decided to trade my Minolta cameras up for Nikon and then been a Nikon since about '89.
Oh, you worked for some newspapers? Yeah,
well, I was funny. Oh, I've got so many funny stories. What had happened was I was trying to freelance with the Journal while I was in high school, which is interesting because, you know, I'm supposed to be in high school, and here I am trying to cut classes and do Edmonton Journal freelance assignments. Don't tell anyone, but I missed a few classes. Mr. Subchition, sorry about your math class. Really didn't like trigonometry. So anyway, so what happened was a Job of the Sun came up in February '90. And back at the time, I mean, I was just starting out. I wasn't very good. But a Job of the Sun came up. And I didn't know that they were, you know, looking for someone and it was like full time. Oh. So what had happened was I got a call, I went in, chatted with them. They needed someone for a day assignment. My first assignment actually for the Sun was the 𝐵𝐴𝐵𝐼𝐼𝐼 cross-country ski race out at Elk Island Park. Or Cooking Lake Blackfoot Recreation Area. What happened was that assignment turned into a day shift. The day shift turned into a weekend shift. And then the weekend shift turned into a week and 2 weeks. But I was so young and green, I didn't know what was going on. It's like, oh, they put me on the schedule. Great, okay. Got to talk to the school about missing a class or two, right?
How were your parents? How did they?
Oh, well, again, my father passed away in '82, so it was just my mother, right? Yeah. And she knew I was into photography. And I didn't really tell her too much, but I was working anyway, right? So she was excited that I was at least getting some work in, right? So it's like, okay. Most people think that photography doesn't pay. And it can be a career that doesn't pay well because a lot of photographers like to spend a lot of money on equipment and computers and not exactly getting their money back on it. So she was worried that I was going to spend all my money on cameras and not have a career out of it. Right. So Job of the Sun came up, and so that week turned into 2 weeks. So then after a couple of weeks, me being Forrest Gump and all, I go to my photo editor at the time, Gary Bartlett. I says, Gary, how long am I on this schedule? He says, oh, until further notice. Okay. Oh. And I didn't know this at the time because I was just so green. A year passed by that I realized I passed my three-month probation as full-time freelance at the Sun.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is back in February '90. And I was like 18, 19 at the time. So
wow, what
now
a great job.
I'm going to throw out a stat that may be true or untrue. So someone will have to verify it. I was probably the youngest full-time freelancer at a newspaper at that time. Obviously, today kids are a little younger. They're getting jobs sooner. Right. But at that time, I was probably the youngest at a daily newspaper. I don't even know how I did it. Even today, I still can't figure it out. And then that turned into 17 years.
You work for yourself now?
I've been freelance since 2007, yeah.
2007.
Still work for some newspapers, wire services, picture agencies, things like that. And I pretty much work for everybody. Really. I work for you if you like.
Yeah. We'll have his contact information in the description below this video.
Appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
You know, fall's coming up, you know. People are looking to get some fall pictures. The funny thing was that idea just came to me the other day. I was driving out to the West End for something else the other day, and I was looking at the trees. It's like, geez, the trees are changing color already.
Right.
Maybe I should think about that. Maybe do some fall pictures, right?
Great idea.
Thank you.
That reminds me of a story. My sister and her husband, they would get their pictures taken by a photographer, and they were out in the mountains, like Hinton area, and they went out to scope out the place, and they were chased by a bear.
Oh, you have to be very careful of that.
Yeah.
And people don't realize when you're out in the wilderness, like even I had Edmonton Fire radio going on one night because the fire trucks are out inside my building. I said, hey, what's going on? Old habits die hard being a news photographer, right? It's like, there's fire trucks, what's going on? Yeah. And then I kept it on for a little while and heard a dispatch for a car versus moose up on down on Highway 19. And I keep remembering it's this time of year you have to be very careful of not only just driving, if you're out in the woods, you know, bears, you know, other wild animals and things. Yeah. So you have to be very, especially in the mountains. There's a lot of displaced wildlife right now, both in Banff and Jasper right? And that's the thing, you have to be really careful about that. Or even just as a photographer, as your personal surroundings. It's like, where are you, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm starting to hear stories, and you can Google this too, people falling off of cliffs trying to do selfies and things, right? It's like, you have to be so careful.
Oh my goodness,
your life
crazy.
Isn't worth it just to get that dramatic shot that you can probably Photoshop too, right? It's like,
nowadays with green screen and stuff.
Exactly, or even just get that drone off of the cliff, not you falling off the cliff, right? Man.
So tell us how you came up with the name Wire Sharp Photography.
Well, I'll keep remembering there's a story behind everything. That's like, I could talk about a watch and there's a story behind that too. So what had happened was early in my career, I was enamored, I guess. In some parts enamored, some parts of it is envious. Another equal part of fascinated by the world of wire photographers. We had some, Andy Clark was
wire photography?
Oh, they worked for a wire service. So back at that time, it was in Canada, it's Canadian Press. At that time, it was Reuters.
Okay.
Agence France Presse was a French-European one, but they mostly dealt with European things. And then there's other wire services at the time, like Sports. There's Getty Images
Freelance?
And stuff. A lot. Well, for Canadian Press, they have a mix of staffers and stringer freelancers, right? And I knew a few of them for both agencies. Canadian Press, one of them is a client actually. Canadian Press is still a client of mine, and Reuters was I did a little bit of work for Reuters. So there's a gentleman by name, and he has a great Instagram page, Andy Clark photo. You should check it out on Instagram. Here's a plug for Andy. Thanks, Andy. See you later. Send me my check in the mail, please. So, no, I remember Andy Clark, and I was always enamored with the wire service industry because they'd be like traveling nomads with their gear, going to different things across the country.
Following the action, eh?
Well, that's the thing, right? Either following Prime Minister, you know, or sports especially, covering like NHL, hockey, or football. Political especially in elections and stuff. Yeah. There's, some greats I can name, like Peter Jones, Dave Buston, Ray Jaguar. There's so many names I can mention, right? I'll probably forget a few here, and they were looking at a photo one day, and they said it's. I was with my boss. We were looking at the images coming off of the old wire machine, which is basically a bit of a unit about this big, this wide, and these prints were coming off of it, right? He looked at it on paper. Yeah, thermal paper, actually.
Black and white or color?
Black and white. Oh. There was an interesting story on how they merged pictures in color back then, too, right? It's like toning a certain way and having targets to make sure they lined up and everything. And my boss looks at the photo and says, he calls it wire sharp. Like, oh, well, if I have that name stuck in my brain, right? So if I ever start a freelance business or company or my own thing, I'll come up with the name Wire Sharp Photography. And I thought that was interesting, so I kept it. So I went freelance in 2007. After leaving the Sun, I started my company name as Wire Sharp Photography, and I've stuck with it.
I do want to say thank you to Swirl Cafe and Games for letting us do our podcast here. Fabulous coffee.
Fantastic. Well, we should cheers to that. Cheers to Swirl.
Yeah, cheers
Thank you.
To Swirl.
Come back, buy a latte.
Yeah, so if you hear, steaming and stuff like that, foaming in the background, that's what that's all about. Everybody's having a great coffee. So photography, would you say that it's a art that can be developed and you can get better and better at it?
Oh, sure. Like back when we had students as ride-alongs, when at the Sun or even at the Journal, if they said, "Hey, go with the Freelancer for the day," we get a lot of students that come in to do like ride-alongs or job shadowing and things like that. And the first thing I say to any of the students is like, you're always going to be learning. There's always something to learn about photography. You don't just get to a point in your career where you know everything. God knows I don't. Boy, there's so much I need to learn too. Not even just the photography part of it, but the business part of it, right? Business economics. It's like we were talking earlier about going broke. My poor mother was worried I was going to go broke just buying equipment. She thought I'd be making her broke buying equipment too. Technically, I did, but we'll just gloss over that part. But yeah, she was worried that I'd just be spending all my money on equipment and not realizing the financial aspect of it, right? And it's tough too, right? Because you still have to make a business, but you still have to buy the equipment to make you get what you need to shoot, right? Yeah.
But you don't have to get top of the line to start off.
Oh, no. Yeah, and the thing is with students, they think that they have to buy everything new. Yes, new's a good idea. And yes, you can use it for tax purposes. Buying equipment, you get some deduction for it, but not as much as you used to. You have to be careful with that. Talk to a tax expert if you're trying to deduct your camera gear or computer gear or anything else. So definitely consult a tax expert on that. But you still have to make money. You still have to pay. Are you living in your parents' basement? Do you have a wife? You have to make a living at it, and it has to be something that you can sustainably make a living off of.
What advice would you give to an up-and-coming freelancer or entrepreneur that's doing photography?
Well, the funny thing was, when I was talking to these photographers over the years, they would say, "Oh, just keep shooting," right? It makes it simplistic when you say that, but a lot of times it's like, maybe you're not going to make that full rate on that wedding, or maybe someone needs some portraits shot at a park somewhere. Okay, maybe it's not going to be a few $100s. It may be what they can afford, right? Or maybe some people can't afford to pay you. Paid work is obviously the most important, but you also have to get experience too, right? So you kind of have to mix that to maybe you do a job here and there where, maybe you're going to make a little less, or maybe they can't afford to pay you, but they can give you exposure. Now, you have to be careful you don't do a lot of things for the exposure. I mean, getting paid for your work is like a DJ or a production company or anybody, right? I mean, even the caterers need to make money too. So you have to start somewhere, and you have to, wherever you can get, not even just get work. It's like if you have a passion for something, chase your passion. If it's like BMX bicycles, if it's cross-country skiing, Brookliner's coming up in February. Don't forget that. Let's see what else. You don't have to shoot NHL games to be a good sports photographer. Or you don't have to shoot CFL games.
You could shoot Kiwi games, and I mean, parents would love to buy photos of their kids in action,
lots of people need pictures of their children, boys or girls, in any sport,
skating or whatever. What are some of your passions that, like you are a photographer, but you must have other passions that you want to focus on?
Like food photography is fun. Eating? Actually, back in the glory days of newspapers, we had different pull-out sections during the week where we do like Tuesday fashion, Wednesday food, lifestyle sections.
I remember that,
and then weekend pull-out sections where you had long-form stories with pictures, right? And picture pages, you know. I miss those. And one of the things, like fashion was fun. And the other thing that we liked doing was the food shoots. And we had great food writers that would come in. The late John Barry, who was a weathercaster at CFRN, CTV. He would be a food writer for us for a few years. Chef Philip Joy, who is now a candy chocolatier. Fantastic. You should go check him out at his...
What's his name?
Philip Joy. Yeah, a trained chef, and
is he from Edmonton?
He is. Yeah, he's working at a farmer's market, or like a market down in Millwoods area. I think Bountiful Market it is. I'm giving a plug to Phil Joy. You owe me for that.
And Bountiful Market.
Right, there you go. There's a plug for that. Right? There you go.
She mentored me through the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce.
Oh yeah, I'm a Chamber of Commerce member, and I'm happy to be a member of it.
Well, that's where we met.
We did, and the networking events. Go to networking events. Yeah, sometimes people have a hard time conversing in social settings, and not everybody's comfortable in social settings. God knows I'm awkward, having this camera in my hand gave me an excuse to talk to people, right? It's like, sure, you can say there's a lot of psychology behind it. It's like, oh, we're using the camera as a shield, possibly, but you're also using that to talk to people.
Right.
It's like you're using the camera to tell that person's story,
right,
and getting them to talk about themselves.
Right.
So I'd rather hear more. Like, here I am blabbing away here. This is probably the first time you're ever going to see this, right? But I've always been behind the camera talking to people about what they do, talking about what
Right.
their
Putting
their
the
story is.
focus on them.
Exactly.
Yeah, shining the
Yeah.
light on them.
And sometimes I think photography's helped me bridge that barrier of that social awkwardness,
Right.
and getting out there and talking to people,
Right.
being in front of them and just having a conversation with someone. That's
Yeah.
the best thing. It's getting to know people's stories and bringing that into a
Exactly.
photograph, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So what else do you do for excitement?
Well, actually, the funny thing was when we were talking about food and photography, so what had happened was back at the Sun, we do all these great food shoots. So this was back at a time we didn't have digital.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what we had to do was develop the film, and then we put on the light table. Is that lighting right? Good. Okay, we can go to the next plate, because you don't want to eat what you just shot.
I know.
Because you get to
It's
eat the food.
expensive. I see.
Yeah, it was great. But with digital, we can see on the back of our screens what we got if we need to adjust the light as we go on. Great.
Okay, right.
And
yes, exactly.
one of the few people, again, I'm giving Chef Phil Joy a credit here, but he would always give me these recipe ideas, and I would see how he created them. It's like, so I'd be at my home in the condo, and it's like, it's not a bad idea, maybe I should try cooking at home, right? I have a nice kitchen, I have a wok, and everything else that you have. Why don't I try cooking? And then that's how I got
Isn't that how you fed yourself, by cooking?
Well, I mean, I'd eat out a lot, right? I mean, yeah, when you have a good income with a photography career, it's like, yeah, I eat out a lot, right? I have friends and stuff. But when you can cook at home, it's much more different, when you're actually cooking for someone. And the late Anthony Bourdain had mentioned that too. When you cook for someone, it really shows that you care about them and how you want to have a meal with them, as opposed to just going to a restaurant. And don't get me wrong, some of my best clients have been in the food service industry, but that's something completely different from when you can have an intimate meal with someone that you cooked for them, and you're talking into the kitchen with them as you're preparing something. There's nothing better than that, I think. And that's how I got turned on to part of a food hobby, is being a foodie, but also cooking at home, right? And that's because of the food work I'd done, shooting the food photography.
I was making, I like to make soups and stews.
Okay,
in this weather, or as it gets colder. And I was making hamburger stew with vegetables and stuff.
Sure.
And my husband was sitting in the kitchen. And so as I'm cooking, I went over and I said, honey, give me a hug. And so he hugged me, and then I just carried my arms, and I just kind of threw that hug into the stew.
Oh, sure.
So that now there's love. I made with
course.
love, right?
That's what it's all about. When you cook with love, you can't beat that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's healthy. So it's fall, and Christmas will be here soon, and Christmas and corporate parties and stuff.
It is, yeah.
Tell us what type of work you offer if anybody's interested in planning for their
Oh, sure.
Christmas.
Well, I mean, there's always holiday parties. It's not just the Christmas season or some of the other holiday parties that come up.
And you were talking about outdoor photo shoots with
there's
for fall
tons of that too, because people like doing pancake breakfasts in the fall too. Maybe if the weather's nice, they do barbecues outside, family gatherings.
I remember
especially.
𝐷 used to do that when they were near in Capilano area.
Yep.
I used to work over there at the printing shop. So you've been in business for a long time now. There must have been some slow times, or
sure. Well, I mean, COVID didn't help, right?
So how did you cope through that?
I still had work at the time, and then at that time, I mean, at least municipal, provincial, and federal governments were there with grants for some people that they could stay working and in business if they had to. And that's the other thing I was going to mention too, right? If you're Indigenous, Aboriginal, there are programs out there that support you for programs if you need to buy equipment or funding for things, If you're a videographer, filmmaker, there's Telefilm Canada and the National Film Board.
So do you have anything you want to say to the viewers?
No, well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for having me out today. I mean, again, I mean, I'm always behind the camera talking to people. It's nice to have a sit and have a conversation about things, right? And show off the camera and everything else, and see what it does. I mean, the great thing about the cameras these days, I'll try and do a soundbite here, right? So the most important thing was, especially at the weddings, is sound, right?
Okay,
so let's say, for example, you're at a wedding and you're getting the vows out, right? And you've got a camera
that video?
It shoots both. So this is a hybrid. It shoots still photos and video.
Okay.
So obviously it won't make much of a sound on video, but when you're shooting like fast sports, then you have that sound going off, right?
So why is it important to have sound?
That's the thing. You can go silent. So when I could shoot 20 frames a second and have no sound like that going off whatsoever,
20 frames a second?
it actually shoots 100 frames a second.
Wow.
It's a smaller file size, of course, but when you're shooting sports or really fast-moving subjects, like say for example,
miss one.
You're trying to catch an arrow going through a balloon.
Yes.
100 frames a second makes a big difference because then you can catch that arrow getting right into that peak moment where it's going into the balloon.
Can you see it step by step?
Oh, sure, yeah. There's browsing programs where you can see each individual frame and all that, right?
Wow.
I mean,
that's quite the camera.
Yeah, and so the thing is that when you're shooting quiet events where you don't want to be obtrusive. The great thing about photography is you're there, but you also want to blend in. Some photographers like to blend in and not be noticed. And if you're a photographer that can blend in and not make a sound, sometimes that affects the quality of your pictures. That if they don't see you, then a lot of times the guard is down a little bit, and then they're more comfortable, right? So if you hear a shutter going off all the time, like the point what you just heard, especially at a wedding, that could be obtrusive. So if you have a camera that goes, or golf on the swing, when you got 100 frames a second going off, Tiger Woods caddy's going to come after you, let me tell you. Not anymore, of course, but no, when you want a silent camera, a silent sound, that makes a big difference, especially when it's intimate events where you don't want that sound going off. That's the best thing.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah, right. I've been that guy over the years. Sorry, but
don't be that guy.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Walter. I appreciate this time that we've spent together,
having me.
getting to know you a little bit.
Yeah, time just went by too fast, actually.
I know, it does that.
Thank you.
Let's have a cheers.
Oh, cheers you there.
Cheers.
All right, thank you.
You got a drink.
We got a drink too, that's right. Well, cheers that again. Sorry, just edit that out.
I'm empty anyway.
Oh, really? I've needed too. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
All right.
Next week, our special guest will be Murray Olekson. He's a personal coach and co-owner of 𝐼𝐬𝐿 Holistic Nutrition and Wellness. So stay tuned for that, all you fitness buffs or wannabe fitness buffs.